there was no indication they'd been intercepted. With afterburners glowing and loaded with Storm Shadow cruise missiles, 4 RAF Tornadoes took to the skies as Britain's contribution to the raids. Their target, a bunker and command post near the city of Homs, believed to be the location of stockpiled chemical weapons. In the Syrian capital Damascus, the target was a research laboratory. The skies above the city lit up with incoming missiles and the interceptor rockets fired in retaliation. Night vision footage appears to show at least one being hit. Syria claims 13 were destroyed before reaching their targets.
Last night's strikes by the US, UK and France were significantly larger than the US action a year ago, and specifically designed to have a greater impact on the regime's capability and willingness to use chemical weapons. And this collective action sends a clear message that the international community will not stand by and tolerate the use of chemical weapons.
The raids targeted locations on the outskirts of the Syrian capital Damascus and Homs. In Washington, President Trump sent this message to Syria's allies, Iran and Russia.
What kind of a nation wants to be associated with the mass murder of innocent men, women, and children? The nations of the world can be judged by the friends they keep. No nation can succeed in the long run by promoting rogue states, brutal tyrants, and murderous dictators.
Russia said such actions would not be without consequences. In a briefing, the Russian military said 103 missiles have been launched, 71 have been shot down. A spokesman said his country was now considering supplying Syria and other countries with the S-300 defensive missile system. On what it called a morning of victory, the Syrian presidency released these pictures of Bashar al-Assad. He said the overnight raids only increased his resolve to fight and crush terrorism in every inch of his country. Syrian television showed these pictures of what was said to be damage caused by one of the missile strikes against Homs. 3 civilians were said to have been injured. On the streets of Damascus, there was defiance this morning. This man said the enemy missiles were destroyed in the Syrian skies and his country had not been affected in any way. The US, Britain and France said the aim of this strike was to destroy Syria's chemical weapons, not to change its regime. Andy Moore, BBC News.
Well, we've seen a lot of reaction from around the world, but what is the reaction in Damascus? As I said, just not too far away at all from here. I'll bring in Martin Patience, our Middle East correspondent here in Beirut. And Martin, I mean, we saw in Andy's report there, President Assad, his briefcase in hand, his suit on, looking calm and walking slowly and carefully into the presidential palace. I mean, trying to give an image of business as usual?
I think very much so. I think earlier in the week he perhaps would have been very worried when, if the military action had matched the rhetoric, it could have potentially been very serious indeed. What we appear to have seen is surgical, precise strikes, but he has been speaking, and he says that these airstrikes increase his resolve to continue fighting and crushing terrorism in every inch of the nation. So he says the fight goes on. Yes, he's been punished for using chemical weapons, but that doesn't mean he can't use airstrikes as well as soldiers on the ground.
Interesting that although there are varying accounts as to how many missiles were shot out of the air, the Syrians say they might have got quite a few of them, the Russians say they got 70 out of 110 or whatever it is. Varying accounts on that, not really varying accounts on the civilian damage.
No, that's interesting. Infrastructure, varying accounts of the damage done. In terms of civilian casualties, well, the only report we've had is that 3 civilians were injured, and that was in a facility close to Homs. But other than that, in the capital, no reports whatsoever of
That's
any
what the Syrians are saying, and fairly similar figures from the US and the British as well. So, you know, where does this go now as far as Damascus is concerned?
Well, I think we just heard where it goes there. The fight will continue And what's been interesting, all the comments we've heard from world leaders, they've been saying this is not about Syria, it's not about regime change, it's not about changing the course of the war, it's about drawing the red line on chemical weapons. So implicitly, they're saying to President Assad, don't use chemical weapons, but the war can go on, can continue as you like it. You have a free hand in regard to that.
Question about Lebanon and by implication the wider region. You live here. You were telling me earlier in the week that one of your neighbours was expressing a bit of concern about where all this was heading. It's not as if life ground to a halt here in Beirut, as we know, but there was concern. That concern now lifted?
In some respects, yes.